Welcome to Recap King. In this video, we will explain Vendetta. This movie tells the story of a detective who decides to seek revenge after his wife is murdered. He intentionally gets arrested for punishing the murderer but discovers a crime ring inside the prison. Will this plan be a brilliant idea? Let's find out in Vendetta. Vendetta begins by showing two police detectives named Mason Danvers and Joel Gaynor, who are about to arrest a drug lord named Victor Abbott and his brother, Griffin. When ambushing into the location of the Abbott brothers, Griffin, who was ready with his weapon, then paralyzed Joel and forced the man to hide. Knowing this, Mason tries to attack Griffin and the two engage in a shootout. After successfully paralyzing Griffin, Mason then searches for Victor's whereabouts. Another shootout was inevitable until both of them ran out of ammunition and got into a fierce fight. Victor manages to knock Mason down and is about to kill him, but then Joel came along with the other policemen and immediately arrested Victor and his brother. Before being sent to prison, Victor tells Mason that he will see Mason soon. Shortly after the incident, Mason, who was at home with his wife, Jocelyn, was seen chatting about the pregnancy they had planned for a long time, but to no avail. Even so, Mason still always supports and encourages his wife to continue to do her best. While at the office, Mason was visited by one of his colleagues who reported that all the witnesses to imprison the Abbott brothers in prison suddenly mysteriously disappeared. Not only that, due to the lack of evidence and the absence of witnesses, they were forced to release Victor and Griffin Abbott right away. Knowing that Victor will be released soon, Mason immediately contacted his wife because he was worried about her safety, remembering Victor's threat some time ago that he would come to see him. Unexpectedly, the one who picked up the phone was not Jocelyn, but Victor, who was already at his house and held his wife hostage. Mason rushed back to his house. On the way, he calls Joel to bring reinforcements to his house. Meanwhile, without the slightest mercy, Victor brutally kills Jocelyn. Mason was devastated when he found out that his wife had been killed by Victor when he got home. He was about to shoot Victor right then and there, but Joel tried to prevent it until Mason finally gave up on killing Victor. Joel and the police managed to apprehend Victor and put him in prison. Sometime since the incident, Mason still looks frustrated and down because of the death of his wife who he loves so much. One day, Joel visits him and advises him to go on a vacation or hunt to clear his head. Mason seems to be considering Joel's suggestion to go hunting, but as it turned out, he did not go hunting for animals but went hunting for Griffin, Victor's brother, to avenge his wife's death. Mason, who already knew the location of Griffin's whereabouts, then alerted Joel and asked his partner to come with the police. After calling Joel, Mason immediately went inside and ambushed Griffin. Without thinking, Mason then kills Griffin while Joel and the police arrive there. Because of deliberately killing someone's life, Mason was immediately arrested by the police, which was deliberately done by him to be thrown into the same prison as Victor to avenge his wife's death. As planned, Mason was placed in the same prison with Victor Abbott. Mason is escorted and directed by wardens named Lester and Ben to his cell inside the prison. However, in the cell, Mason was visited by a warden named Will who said he was asked to come to the warden's room. Arriving at the warden's office, the warden named Snyder tried to warn Mason that most of the prisoners in this prison were criminals who were caught by him, so he had to be more careful because maybe the prisoners would take revenge on him, but Mason had expected this and was wary of it. While in the dining hall, Mason finally meets Victor who insults him about the death of his wife, but Mason then retaliated by saying that he had killed Griffin the same way Victor killed his wife. Not long after that, while Mason was doing laundry work at the prison, he was approached by three inmates who immediately beat him up. When Mason was almost pushed and could no longer fight because of being beaten, Ben appeared and immediately separated them all so that Mason did not suffer a fatal injury. The next day, the inmates were out in the field when Mason, still visibly in pain from his injuries, approached Ben who was on guard watching the prisoners. Ben turns out to be a police detective before being expelled and becoming a prison warden. Ben then tells Mason that his plan to take revenge on Victor by going to this prison is a big mistake because Victor is even more powerful in prison. Victor has killed the strongest prisoners in this prison, so he is highly respected. Not only that, Victor is even further developing his drug business in prison, with the help of two of his trusted men, Drexler and Booker. Ben then emphasizes that Victor is actually just the body of the snake, not the head, which indicates that there are more powerful people than Victor in the drug business in prison. A few days later, Joel visits Mason in prison to find out how he is doing. But Mason then asked Joel to check the prisoners who had recently been released because he assumed that Victor Abbott did his drug business in prison through them. Unbeknownst to Mason and Joel, Lester overhears their conversation and reports the matter to Snyder. After that, when Mason returned to his cell, he remembered the names of his attackers in the laundry room who were none other than Victor's men, Marco, Flynn and RB. Mason then makes a simple but lethal weapon from a pen to retaliate for the actions of those who intend to kill him. Mason then launched a counterattack the next day by stabbing Marco with his gun, and the man died from blood loss. After that, Mason came to Flynn, who was alone, and strangled him to death. Knowing that his 2 colleagues had died at the hands of Mason, RB immediately went to Victor and asked him to do something to Mason. An enraged Victor then orders Drexler to give Mason a warning. Drexler then sends someone to attack Mason in his cell, but Mason managed to knock out the man to a pulp. Mason is then called into Snyder's room, where he offers Mason a deal, which Mason vehemently refuses. Because Mason refuses his offer, Snyder then orders Will to lock Mason in solitary confinement. Knowing that Mason had succeeded in immobilizing his men, Drexler then went to Victor and asked that Mason be killed immediately, but Victor told them to wait because Snyder had no order yet. After getting out of solitary confinement, Mason returns to take revenge on RB by asking his cellmates for help. RB, who was walking alone, was called by his cellmate, who told him that Victor was waiting for him. However, when he came there, not Victor was waiting for him, but Mason, who immediately beat him until he died. Victor, who can't just stay silent because 3 of his men have been killed by Mason, then goes to Snyder to ask permission so he can kill Mason as soon as possible. However, Snyder immediately refuses Victor's request because Mason is a well-respected cop in the police force, and his death in prison will negatively impact his career as chief warden. Snyder then hands over a piece of paper with Joel Gaynor's name on it and tells Victor to use the man as a tool to get revenge on Mason. At Snyder's orders, Lester then contacts Joel and informs him of the death of Mason Danvers, who had been engineered to lure Joel into prison. However, upon arrival at the prison, Joel is beaten badly by Victor and his men, and Mason witnesses the torture. The next day, Mason went to Snyder in his room and asked about a deal that would benefit both parties. Snyder says that he wants him to kill the people out there who mess with his business because Mason, who knows so much about police rules, is also a cold-blooded killer. But before that, Mason made a request to Snyder, who immediately agreed. Mason apparently asked Snyder to help him kill Booker, one of Victor's right-hand men. Knowing that Booker is dead, Victor immediately goes to Snyder in his office and threatens him that he will kill Mason right away. Realizing that Victor will attack him while they are in the dining hall, Mason deliberately attacks one of the guards to send him to solitary confinement to anger Victor. While in solitary confinement, Mason is approached by Ben, who gives him a knife for self-defense. The next day, Snyder meets Mason in solitary confinement to discuss their deal. However, Mason instead said they didn't have any agreement from the start, and he didn't need Snyder anymore. Snyder, furious that Mason had betrayed him, then leaves Mason and seems to be planning something. The next day, Snyder comes to Mason and says that he will transfer him to another prison so he can't take revenge on Victor. After being released from solitary confinement, Mason is informed that Snyder is arranging for Mason's transfer to another prison to be expedited. Knowing that Victor was in Snyder's office, Mason then approached Drexler, who was alone, and beat the man. Not long after, Drexler's men came and they gang up on Mason, but Mason can easily beat them. After that, Mason drags Drexler onto the prison roof and knocks him right on top of Will, who is on guard, causing them to die instantly. The below prisoners took Will's gun and made a mess of the prison grounds. Victor tries to shoot Mason in the chaos, but the bullet hits another prisoner instead. Mason then forces Victor to fight with his bare hands. As Mason and Victor engage in a fierce fistfight, Snyder arrives and shoots Mason in the shoulder, knocking him down. Snyder then gives his gun to Victor so he can kill Mason immediately, but later, Mason tells Victor that it was Snyder who helped him kill Booker. Hearing this, Victor was immediately furious and broke Snyder's knee so that he lay on the ground. When Victor was about to kill Snyder, the guards immediately tried to stop the big man. After successfully getting back up, Mason is attacked by other prisoners who are easily knocked down by him. But after that, Lester pointed a gun at Mason, which he grabbed easily, and then shot the warden. Victor, who managed to defeat the guards with his strength, then approached Mason and the two were again involved in a fierce battle. However, just as Victor was about to kill him, Mason took the knife Ben had given him and slit Victor's throat until he died instantly. The film ends by showing Snyder trying to kill Mason, but then his action was thwarted by Ben, who paralyzed him, and Snyder was finally convicted of all acts of fraud and violation of the law during his tenure as chief warden of the prison. The moral of this film is that hatred and revenge will not bring good to anyone and instead will bring misery, not only to the target of revenge but to the person who carried out the revenge.